Dr.Hinds, welcome.
You can't do that.
Yo, Dr.Hinds, welcome back, right? Please speak about why many argue Martin Luther King was more radical in his philosophy than Malcolm X towards the end of his life.
I don't agree with that observation. I think that both of them were going through extreme changes in various ways towards the end of their lives. For Malcolm X, of course, number one, he was breaking away from the Nation of Islam, the teachings of Elijah Muhammad. He was breaking away from a more fringe form of Islam, embracing a more traditional form that he encountered during his trip to Mecca. But also, I think he was becoming more, in some ways, mainstream in terms of politics. He was not as anti-white as he was when he was a part of the Nation of Islam. He began to be more collaborative in terms of the groups he was engaging. He's beginning to become more overtly political. He was forming his own organizations. His views regarding being more anti-capitalist and so forth were coming more to the fore. King, on the other hand, was becoming more comprehensive in his views regarding issues of poverty, not being just an American problem for American blacks here, but internationally. He was still, in many ways, still committed to nonviolent resistance. He did not want to embrace the Black Power movement for various reasons. So in some ways, they were converging in their views. And I think that's something that's oftentimes lost. King, I think some will say, was becoming more radical because he is not oftentimes depicted today accurately, given how he was changing towards the ends of his life. We had this King, this idea of King of being the integrationist, the person who was radically nonviolent, which he was, but he was becoming more radical in terms of the scope of his view on how things could change, not just in this country, but internationally. I think that was causing a lot of problems. He was really committed to improving the conditions of workers in this country, which a lot of people didn't like. And so there were parts of King's thought, his activities that were becoming more radical. But I don't think it's right to say that he was becoming more radical than Malcolm X. I think they were both changing dramatically at the end of their lives. And in a lot of ways, they were coming more closely together in their views than people give them credit for. They only met once in their lives, and had a brief personal conversation once. But as far as their views and kind of the things they want to be a part of and how they thought the country should change, they were kind of converging in some ways. I mean, Malcolm X was still a nationalist, King was still an integrationist, but to say that he'd become more radical than Malcolm X, I don't think that was the case at all.
I have two questions. What sparked King's interest in fighting poverty? Are you aware of that?
Yeah. I think King, now one of the main differences between King and Malcolm X is the way their upbringings, their childhoods. King had a life of comfort in a lot of ways, and Malcolm X struggled mightily with poverty because his father died when he was very young. His mother had a drastic mental collapse when he was young. And so he was really a person who experienced extreme poverty during his youth, whereas King came up in a very middle-class environment. King chose, in many ways, to live a life of poverty as he got older. Poverty is probably too strong a word, but he didn't. He could have had a very comfortable life financially. He could have stayed in the church. He could have become an academic, had a comfortable academic job, and probably still participated in the civil rights movement. But he chose to commit his life fully to the struggle for racial equality. So I think his experience not having the comforts of the church, not having the comforts of an academic job, a part of his campaign, they went to Chicago, and he maintained residence in Chicago, and he experienced living amongst the poor there for a period of time. So I think his own life experiences gave him more a sense of what it was to live in poverty as he got older, not when he was younger. Whereas for Malcolm X, his own experiences during his whole childhood and even later in life, Malcolm X never had any financial security. And so he understood what it was to live like that in a much more profound way than King ever did. But King, I guess, through certain experiences when he got older, began to recognize how impactful poverty was, not just race, but also class, on a person's sense of well-being.
And I've heard numerous leaders speak about this. There seems to be a disconnect with this generation in regards to when you are doing the work and having financial security.
It's a sac. Well, they both made a conscious choice to do away with the comforts of wealth. Now, King, I think even more so than Malcolm X, could really exploited his position and had a lot of financial gain because he was the orator, the connections he had through the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Again, could have had a comfortable academic job, his role as a pastor of a church, but he decided not to do that. But I mean, I think for King and for X, I recognize that allowed them a certain amount of freedom to not to have to rely on their livelihoods from certain benefactors who, you know, once they control or once they contribute a certain amount of financial support to an organization, they could kind of control the message as well. I think they understood that very early on. So they kind of cut those ties and allowed them to be kind of free in what they would express.
And last question in regards to Malcolm X and the growth of his philosophy. Do you think he experienced a lot of internal conflict while he was still with the nation? Because it seemed like his views changed, but he wasn't able to express them because they didn't coincide with the views of the nation at the time.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I think this is an interesting point. This might take us a little bit off topic, but when Malcolm X joined the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad was the unquestioned leader of the organization. They still paid homage to W.D. Farad and so forth, but he was an unquestioned leader. A problem with institutions when they become stronger, because the Nation of Islam was not really prominent before he got there. He really grew the organization in sort of terms of number of mosques, in terms of its prominence amongst the media and so forth. Malcolm X really grew the nation a great deal. All right. A problem with institutions when they grow is that leaders at the beginning of these organizations are usually viewed as being charismatic figures, right? Once the institution becomes established and once it begins to grow, charisma starts to wane as the institution becomes more important. Now, they had a problem in the Nation of Islam in that even though Elijah Muhammad was the leader, Malcolm X was seen as being far more charismatic. Elijah Muhammad was never a great public speaker. He didn't have the personal charisma that Malcolm X had. So that, of course, caused a great amount of tension, where, you know, the young minister is the one who seems to be growing the organization so much. But there's another point to be made in that there's some question as to how much the Nation of Islam was a religious organization for Malcolm X or was seen as like a social political organization, right? Some believe he really had a religious awakening when he went to Mecca. For many, he viewed the nation as being a means of creating social change, not really religious change. But the conflict for Malcolm X was that the Nation of Islam never sought to be a political organization, right? They didn't demonstrate, they didn't protest. They spoke against the powers that be in a lot of ways. But that tension always existed within him because he wanted to be more politically active. The nation didn't want to do that. Theologically now, in terms of his beliefs and tenets, that break really came when he went to Mecca and saw for himself, you know, that some of the things that they were teaching weren't really in line with the traditional views of Islam. So I mean, the tension existed politically in some ways because he wanted to be more politically active, and then later on, theologically, when he found out what they were teaching, was not in line in a lot of ways with traditional Islam.
Historically, Martin Luther King has been presented in a certain light, commercialized, but there's an aspect that people don't speak about. Martin Luther King being viewed as the return of Christ amongst members of the Black church. Can you speak on that?
Well, there's a stream of, well, there's a history behind this that goes back farther than Martin Luther King Jr., which is this Black Messiah. These Black Messiah figures, these figures that come along through history who are seen as being the deliverers of Black people. He's just part of a long lineage of this. It's a book by Wilson Jeremiah Moses that talks about this. King was seen as being, you know, the second coming of Moses, the Black Messiah, some deliverer who's going to take Black people to the promised land. There are some people who embraced this, some followers who embraced this, and some that hated it. There's a prominent civil rights activist called Ella Baker, who criticized King and the organization and some of its leaders because they had this Messiah complex. Now, she had this famous statement. She would say that strong people don't need strong leaders. Strong people don't need a messiah. She was one of those, with many others, who felt that that the followers or the persons who follow these leaders too often look to them to change things without taking responsibility on themselves. Now, King himself was a very complex figure. Maybe sometimes he did believe that he was the chosen one to change things like that. It could be. But he was very conflicted. He was very aware of his own personal flaws, his own personal failings, and how he didn't live up to some of the ideals that he espoused. So, I mean, did he walk around thinking he was a black messiah all the time? No. These were the followers who embraced this more than King himself. And we still have that kind of stuff going on today among certain people. I mean, waiting for the next black leader to bring about a certain amount of change. Some people thought Obama was the next black messiah. And some people are still looking for some other political figure to fill that role. So, I mean, King is just one of the persons who fall in a long line of such persons.
Is this need for a messiah remnants of just constant oppression and being beat down? Or is it a situation where, I don't know, it seems a fine line between a need for help and no accountability?
Well, yeah, it's a fine line, but it's also, what can a community do for itself? First of all, if the community doesn't have resources, if the community doesn't have the wherewithal, if it doesn't feel connected to some divine figure, because one of the parts, or one of the things that the charismatic figure has that we don't have, we believe, is some connection to the divine. They have some special power that we don't have. So again, part of the beating down is, we don't have any resources, but also we've lost our connection to some higher power that can radically change things, because we believe the charismatic figure, or the black messiah, or the second coming of Jesus, whatever this figure represents, that they could bring about miraculous change in our current situation. Not gradual change.
They have the direct connect.
Yeah, they could change it overnight or over a series, like some miracle is going to happen. Things are going to change, which most people don't believe they can do. Which again goes back to the frustration of waiting for gradual change, or for laws being passed, or some other thing to happen. People get frustrated. They want the quick fix. And that makes them susceptible to all kinds of dangerous messages too. Because one of the things that the Messiah requires, or the charismatic figure, is obedience from the followers, right? So you have to give up something when you believe in whatever this person is preaching. So for King, or a person in his organization, you got to march, you got to protest. You know what I'm saying? You got to do something. You have to give up something in order to have this change come about. So I think that's something that people have to consider too. It's not just what the Messiah is doing, but what you have to give up to be a part of the movement too. That's self-sacrifice. That's a part of it.
So far, right. There's a historical figure who many people don't know about.
No.
Right? And his impact is so immense. It's kind of sad, but we're gonna teach the people today. Please speak about Hubert Harrison.
All right. Hubert Harrison was a prominent, you can't even call him a civil rights activist. You could call him a thinker, an organizer, an orator, a writer. I mean, this guy, philosopher. He was like the traditional polymath, is what the term is, right? He knew a lot about a lot of different things, spoke different languages, could read in different languages. I mean, but the thing is, nobody talks about this man. Nobody talks about him. He was a prominent figure in the American socialist movement in the early 20th century. Now, he broke away. Now, when people say these terms or use these organizations or movements like socialism or capitalism, they think that they were radical about everything, right? They're radical about class. They're radical about race. They're radical about gender, and that was not the case. Harrison found out during his time in the socialist movement that they were not as progressive about race as they talked or he thought they should be. So he broke away from that. And he started his own movement, He was very influential on Marcus Garvey. He was very influential on other black radical thinkers in the early 20th century. He was a person who started organizations. He's a leader in a movement that was called the New Negro Movement. He started a publication called The Voice. He was a very influential writer, and when Garvey started the UNIA, he was a very prominent writer in that movement. So his role in the early Negro movement is immense and touch a bunch of different areas: the arts, literature, education. He would start these lyceums where groups of men and women would get together and really self-educate and read and debate and talk. Some people go to New York now, I know it's as prominent as it used to be decades ago, but like the street corner preaching and those who would give lectures on the corner, he was an early proponent of that and was great at it and would captivate. You see, the thing about Harrison that people have to recognize too, he was very concerned about reaching the masses, not only giving the message, but learning from the masses as well, right? Where organizations like the NAACP were kind of middle class focused, or he felt like the socialist organizations were more concerned with the middle class, or even the CPUSA, the communist movement, they were concerned with the middle class. He was always about those who are overlooked, the masses. Not only, again, what he could teach them, but what he could learn from them as well. And that's who his preaching and speeches were directed to. Now, he's problematic for a lot of persons because, even today, because there are two things he was against that the African-American community is still very ambivalent about today. Number one, capitalism. He was anti-capitalist. Number two, he's anti-church, anti-religion, period, right? He was hardcore science, reason. He didn't want anything to do with religion, right? If it couldn't be proved by logic, he didn't want to touch it. And that made him somebody who was not very popular. Another thing that Harrison has to be credited for, what made him different from a lot of mainstream leaders, is that he did not want to take support from the white community for his organizations, right? He wanted to be black, supported by the black community. He wanted to focus on black issues, and that kind of set him apart too as well. But yeah, overlooked figure, who was very influential on a lot of people who came. J.A. Rogers, A. Philip Randolph, Marcus Garvey. Well, Rogers and Randolph, if you read their writings, they talk about how brilliant he was and what a great speaker and orator he was. But if you read his writings, there's a collection of writings that are available. You get a book of them. I mean, man, he's everything. He wrote about everything, talked about everything, but greatly influential and overlooked.
All right. Question I have now. We spoke about the influence, right?
Yeah.
Some people argue that Marcus Garvey pirated his ideas.
Harrison said that.
Harrison
Harrison said, he said everything good about the UNIA he took from the Liberty League is what it's called. He took from the Liberty League.
Please elaborate on that. What are your views on that?
Well, I mean, Harrison was, I think Marcus Garvey took from Harrison mainly was this race consciousness piece, black pride, trying to uplift the black race in terms of his consciousness about not being, the inferiority complex that many African Americans were experiencing at that time. But he was also an internationalist. He was looking at making connections, for instance, between the Caribbean community and the African American community in this country, where there's been a rift or wedge between those communities throughout history. Another thing that he was focused on is that he did not believe that African Americans had the role of going to redeem Africa. He believed that if Africa was going to change, it was going to be on what Africans did for themselves. All right? Now, he differed from Garvey. Some of it was personal, some of it was philosophical. He thought Garvey was an egomaniac. He didn't like how Garvey handled his finances. He thought that Garvey inflated a lot of the things that he was talking about when he gave his speeches and so forth. So he broke away from Garvey after a period of time as well. Another part that they differ with, Harrison was not really a firm believer in like a vanguard, a leadership that was going to bring black people out of their condition. He was a believer in the masses doing for themselves, a community doing for itself. So he was not a fan of, Du Bois' talented 10th. Like it's going to be the educated elite in the African American community that are going to change things. He didn't believe in that. He didn't believe in Garvey's view that some leader was going to come out, again, the Black Messiah thing. Some Black Messiah was going to come in and change the conditions of African Americans. And he saw Garvey, I think he saw it as a little dangerous, that Garvey thought he was kind of this Messiah figure who was going to lead people back to Africa to change their condition. So they're different on many things, but again, he himself said that if there's anything good about the UNIA, Garvey got it from me. And again, the organizations that he started, the Liberty League and the Voice as far as the paper. And by the way, the Liberty League, I think, was the first mass black radical organization in this country. And Hubert Harrison started that. All right. So they had their differences, but again, the influence that he had on various leaders was immense.
And why do you think history has kind of left them out of the pages?
Everything that we value in this country is being important. The two major things, the capitalist the value of capitalism and the religion. he was against both of those. So he's not appealing in any way. He did not, again, seek support from the white community. And he was against many of the leaders that have been upheld throughout history. He was against Booker T. Washington and the Tuskegee Machine. He was not a fan of Du Bois. For instance, I don't know if you, some of you or people watching this may know, Du Bois wrote this piece called Closing Ranks when he was trying to get a job with the government. And he was basically telling the African-American community to, I think the line he used, like, put aside your petty grievances or something, like overlook all the racism and all the torment to support the war effort. This was all about. And Harrison basically said that because Du Bois wrote that piece, he's unfit to be a leader in the African-American community, right? Because the compromise, we're gonna overlook all this and support the war, basically because you wanna get you're trying to get a government job, whatever the case may be. And another thing, he was immensely critical of a lot of people and a lot of philosophies, and that rubs people the wrong way. So I think that's another reason why. I mean, he wasn't really supportive of a lot of the movements that we support today, I thought were so grand back in the early 20th century.
Next question I want to ask is, manhood in a capitalistic society is based on your ability to earn.
Definitely, yeah.
By default, unfortunately, we're dealing with black men because there are many white men and other groups that fall into this place. But in regards to black men, based on how the system is set, it seems like they're already denied the ability to partake in manhood in this country.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Because of their financial situation?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. And I don't see how that's going to improve. Now, throughout history in this country, as you said already, your ability to earn and take care of your family has really been the primary way that we define manhood. And since the beginning, African American men, for various reasons, have been denied that opportunity. By and large, they've been denied that opportunity. The question is, given that that's the case, what are the other avenues available to assert or affirm one's sense of manhood? And in this environment that we have now, I don't know what those are. Now, you could say, some men are saying, even if I can't earn, be a more involved father, being more involved in the household. But the data, for instance, I read this study years ago that suggested that even when men are unemployed or they're not going to school, these are men, family men, married men with children, even when they're not working, they're not going to school, they spend most of their time taking care of themselves, not of their families or the children, or doing community work. Whether that's the case in African American community, I don't know. It probably is. But what are the other avenues to achieve a sense of manhood when the financial avenue isn't available? And I don't know, because culturally we don't have those. It's always been this one way. And now the other issue is, as women are earning more and are more out of the household even more, again, it causes a challenge to what other ways men can achieve a sense of manhood. I don't know how they can. It's a cultural issue. And the problem is, it's not just black men facing this now, it's white men as well. So in terms of what the solution is, given that those old industrial jobs that used to be available aren't there anymore, given the role that women are playing now as being earners in the home, I don't know what the solution is to that. So we would have to really figure out what other avenues can be available for men to achieve a sense of manhood. And outside of being a breadwinner and taking care of your family and being viewed as being a man based upon what you can purchase, what you can buy, I really don't know what those other options are available to men. There aren't any, to be honest. There aren't many, at least, to be honest.
Historically, rites of passage has been an integral part of African culture. What would rites of passage for black boys look like in our modern times in this society?
Yeah. What would rites of passage look like today? One of the issues is, what were those rites of passage, what are they seeking to achieve? Rites of passage before were not just about affirming manhood, they were a sign that you were ready to contribute to the community. And since we don't have those communal bonds like we used to, I don't know if it means the same thing anymore. Are you going to take, a son out in the woods and hunt? You know what I'm saying? Take them fishing? I mean, you could create your own rites of passage, but the question is, what are they trying to achieve? I think for many young men, the rites of passage that they're looking for, what they're trying to achieve is a sense of identity, right? Beyond the family. They want to have some sense that the community knows what I can do, that I'm a part of the community, that I'm a part of the community's outlook in terms of what our ideologies are, how we derive meaning out of the world. And so I think reestablishing those in terms of African American young men is very important. But again, what happens after those rites of passages are complete, I don't know. That's a real issue. Because again, it's more than just, oh, I'm a man now or I'm part of this male group. It's ideally, ultimately, I'm ready to contribute to my community. And if that's not a part of the rites of passage, then I don't see the value of it. If we're not giving these young men a sense that they, number one, they have an identity. That's number one. They're part of a community that they feel valued, they feel recognized. But also, they have some skills, some abilities, something that they feel my community appreciates. Then I don't see the value of it. And I think that's the bigger reason why we really don't have prominent rites of passage anymore, because it's so individualized now. I can feel I'm great at something, but then the community recognizing what I do is really not a part of it like it used to be, because those communal bonds aren't what they were in the past.
And can you pinpoint the decline of the communal bond? Because we grew up 80s, 90s, and there was still a sense of community there.
Yeah, but it was way off.
It wasn't an
no,
old time
yeah,
community,
yeah. But it was still a little bit of a
remnants
left.
of it.
Yeah.
So like, when did the thing just get deleted?
Well, I don't know if it got deleted, it just slowly waned. And first of all, most of us don't live where we grew up anymore. That's a big problem. So those families that you grew up around, those neighborhoods, you're like, I'm out. You know, and that's a sign of achievement too, getting away from those communal bonds. Part of it, the religious organizations we used to be part of, church, mosque, whatever the case is, aren't as prominent. They're still prominent, very prominent in the Black community, but not as prominent as they were decades ago. So that's an issue too. And just, I think the more that we got integrated into the mainstream, whether economically, whether culturally, or otherwise, the value of community started to wane too. It was more individualized. What I have accomplished, what I can achieve, where I live. You know, it's no longer that we ethos I used to guide a lot of neighborhoods and communities. So I mean, it's not one thing, but I think over the decades, that communal ethos and that communal focus began to wane. And along with it, some of the rituals. And again, this is more than like some formal rituals. A lot of informal things that people used to do to make them feel that they were a part of the community too. They're no longer there.
What would be an example of an informal thing you're referring to?
Shucks, you got something like a big sale at the church, somebody, little things, right? If somebody's at their house, all right, cooking dinner at the church, whatever. This is something I'm contributing to the community. Or, we know this, like, they used to have a couple men in the churches to take the younger guys to go play basketball or football. I mean, is that a formal ritual? No, but it is a ritual in a way too, though. I mean, it makes you feel like you're a part of a community. It makes you feel like you're recognized by a group. But even those little things I used to have, like open gym at neighborhood basketball courts, right? Some guys to open a gym, let the kids go in there and run around for a couple hours. It still made you feel like somebody older in the community knew who you were, knew you could do something so you could shoot a basketball. You know how to play a game. But those are little, informal rituals that are not, some stages involved that you have to go through. But informally, they are in a way that makes you feel like you're recognized by the community. But those things are gone in a lot of ways. Now, one of the things that we still have, which is Elijah Anderson talks about in some of his work, this guy does a lot of research on young African American men, is the gang culture. It has those kind of elements, the rituals, the recognition, the sense of community, all the things that we think are missing in the wider community, they still possess those. And that's why, in a lot of ways, this is what a lot of young men turn to get recognition, to feel that they're, because a part of ritual, what it provides, it gives you a sense of confidence. I can do something well, right? It gives them that sense of confidence, even though it's for negative things. Makes them feel like they're a part of a community. It also provides an identity. It might be a negative identity, but it's an identity nonetheless. So those are the kind of things that I think are being offered even in this negative environment.
Can you please break down the history of prosperity preaching and its negative impact on the Black church?
That's a serious question. The history of prosperity. First of all, let me say this, that prosperity. People wanting to prosper. Has been around since the beginning of mankind, right? You got some tribe living in a village somewhere praying for rain because they want their harvest to be better than last year. They're praying. This is a form of prosperity. So it's not, tied to just our modern context. But in terms of the church itself, there is a prominent preacher. His name was E.W. Kenyon. He's seen as being one of the leading figures of what is considered modern prosperity preaching. Now, prosperity preaching has to do not just with wealth, it has to do with health, your overall well-being, right? That God wants us to prosper in all phases of our lives. A later figure who picked this up was a preacher, a famous preacher named Kenneth Hagin. A lot of these were charismatic Pentecostal preachers, right? Now, in terms of the African-American context, you have figures like Daddy Grace or Father Divine. I mean, these are early preachers who really took on the prosperity message. And somebody like Daddy Grace, for instance, he sold products that he would bless. These commercials we used to see, if you want, blessed water, or he had blessed toothpaste, all this kind of stuff he would sell. Now, for most people, they don't have a problem with prosperity gospel in terms of health or even congregants achieving some kind of superior economic status. They have a problem with preachers start making a bunch of money and they're having private jets and they're driving around Rolls Royces and so forth. And that is something that even some of the early figures in American prosperity gospel preaching had a problem with. So for instance, Kenneth Hagin, this is a few decades ago. This is not like back in the early 20th century. He wasn't comfortable with, preachers say like a Creflo Dollar today. Taking the message, making it almost purely economical in a sense. So for them, the comprehensive view of what it meant to be, to prosper in God, whatever the case may be, became too focused on economics. And that the economic focus is what a lot of people have a problem with in terms of the African-American community. Because you have persons in the African-American community who are claiming prosperity and their whole livelihood doesn't reflect that yet. So for instance, the person who's saying, well, God wants me to be blessed, I'm gonna get a Mercedes, but I'm still living in the projects. Or you have the person that says, God wants me to be blessed, they take out some crazy mortgage on a house when they're working at Walmart or something like that. So that's where the imbalance comes in. You have communities who don't have the means to flourish economically, but yet they're still hearing this message that this is what God wants them to do. So I think that's the biggest problem many people have with it.
Are preachers in a rough spot? Because I've noticed that preachers who don't preach a prosperity doctrine, their attendance seems a little light.
But this started years ago after the Second World War, when this country saw the biggest rise in the middle class in world history in terms of wealth, right? You had parishioners or congregants who went to church. They didn't want to hear about the blessings of poverty anymore. They want to follow the preacher who was living in some small parsonage who was not economically secure. They wanted to see the way they were living reflected in the pulpit. So that's why they wanted to see ministers who were living well. And to be honest, another thing that happened is that's when a lot of pastors began to follow this model of the businessman, being economically successful, and the churches were viewed as being places where you could have could attain some level of economic success. So it wasn't all, figures like Daddy Grace again or Father Divine, parishioners too, because they started to live better, and because they started to move to the suburbs, and they started having 2 cars and the 4-bedroom, 2-bedroom house and the fenced-in yard and all that. They wanted pastors or preachers in a way to reflect what they were doing and to let them, in many ways, make them feel comfortable with their lifestyles. And I think that's where the connect came to. So part of it were certain leaders who exploited it, but it's also parishioners who again began to become more affluent in the white community, predominantly, and later became took hold of the African American community, but basically in the white community where it started, and wanted their leaders, their church leaders, kind of reflect the lifestyle they were living. So that's kind of in a way the roots of that.
Sports is supposed to be used to develop youth, build community, help youth with resilience.
Yes, yeah.
But it seems like capitalism has, I don't want to say fully destroyed, but definitely hurt youth sports.
Yeah.
Can you speak on that?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest issue has become how early some of these kids are exploited in terms of their abilities. Like before, you at least get at least to your teenage years before anybody knew who you were. Now you got people 6th, 7th, 8th grade, videos on YouTube, trying to get their names out there, trying to be known and so forth. The AAU phenomenon, people believe has ruined basketball because it's all about sponsorship, tournaments, and it's an ongoing cycle. So I mean, in a lot of ways, it's ruined it. But and again, I think the biggest problem is what these young kids desire from a very young age. They want to have a brand. They want to be marketed. So it's not about the skill or the love of the game. It's about what they can sell real quick or how much money they can make off of their skill. So, I mean, it taints it in a lot of ways, but I don't know. Again, it's kind of like a lot of these questions. Given how dire the situation is in many ways, and given how capitalism and the money has corrupted these things, I don't see a way out of it, right? Because right now, if you're in 8th grade or a freshman and sophomore in high school, you have desire to play, say, college basketball, right away it's like getting your videos online, how to get recognized, how to get noticed, how to get a recruiter to pay you some attention. It's all about that recognition and marketing that's a part of the capitalist system. And if you don't do that, you're not going to get recognized. So it's kind of hard to tell a kid, avoid doing these things, try to keep yourself as entertained as possible for as long as possible. But if you do that, you miss the recognition, you miss the opportunities that the other kid who's doing this 24/7 is engaged in. So yeah, I mean, it's corrupted the sports and youth sports in a lot of ways, but I don't see a way out of it or how it's going to change.
Do you think youth is still learning those life lessons within sports that they learned prior in this environment?
I don't know. But because again, if you got a local team and you got a coach who's hard on you, who's riding you, right? Who's trying to teach you the right things. The way thing goes today, you got a coach, 2 times over trying to recruit you who treat you the way you want to be treated, right? So it's like there's just so much of it and so many opportunities now, which is great for some kids. But the other thing is that resilience, having you're having to deal with certain difficulties that you had to do decades ago because the opportunities weren't available. That kind of does wane or wear on somebody's ability to deal with difficulties in a way you used to have to probably decades ago.
Yeah, I was shocked that the whole transfer thing that's going on right now, your ability to just get up and leave.
See, that's back to the money thing. This whole NIL thing that they have going on, where the college kids can make money outside of school now. It's not just you have your scholarship or what the money the school gives you. You could get $1 million deal in college and so forth. But that goes to, again, if a kid or a young athlete can go to, say, Northeastern University, right? And it feels a good environment, coach is going to treat them right. They can learn skills there. They can grow as a basketball player. Are they going to choose that school over, say, going to the University of Florida, where they might not be a culture there like they have in Northeastern, but there may be financial opportunities there that they're going to miss out on at Northeastern? This is all a factor now. Now, it may hurt you long term in terms of your development and growth, not just as a player, but as a person, right? Because there are little frustrations and nuances there in Northeastern that you're not going to face at Florida, right? But you're going to go to Florida because the money's there, the brand is there. So little things like that, again. I mean, there's more choices available for these players. There's more money available. But again, you can choose now not to face certain difficulties and circumstances you probably had to in the past.
I always feel, as a person who plays sports, I always feel sports destroy more people than it help. But I feel that in this environment now is just magnitude to a different type of proportion. Yeah,
because now it's not just before, well, you might be guilty because you're not as good a player as whoever this other person may be. But now you're guilty because you can't make the money that the other player is making, right? You're on a basketball team and the starter point guard has a deal with some local dealership who's paying him, not crazy money, but say $50,000 a year to sponsor their cars, whatever the case may be, right? You sitting on the bench, you practice every day, you lifting weights, right? You think you got skill, but it compounds the frustration now because now, number one, you ain't starting, you're not as good a player, and number two, you can't get the money he's getting.
Yeah, there are a lot of dynamics in that too, because it's just like if a person has a sponsorship, even if the person's not performing to the level, the coach still has to play
That's what I'm saying. Yeah,
and it just creates too much schisms within the team.
It's a team, but it's just what it does to your own self worth. Because now it's double fold. I'm not a good enough player, and now financially he's doing much better than I'm doing. And then, like you said, the coach has to favor not just the better player, but that person who's going to be more marketable in a lot of ways. So it messes a lot of things up. But again, everybody complained for decades because the players weren't making money. Everybody said they were being exploited. Because back to the capitalism thing, right? They weren't making any money. They were being exploited. All they got was their scholarship and nothing else.
But
and
they're
now,
still far right. This come like the civil rights law being passed. They're still being exploited because what's occurring is that you have like not even a percentage of people who are getting paid.
No, it's the same. Yeah. But
50% of the players are making money now. It's still the same.
The small percent, I know.
But it's like percent.
There's a whole capitalism thing, right? Like how many people are the millionaires or the billionaires or the person making it's the same thing. But everybody has the same drive, right? I'm not good enough until I have access to this. And that's the problem. It is the same thing.
So that's the trick they're not seeing in a sense.
No. But it's dangled in front of you like you can do this, right? Because I'm sure the plot, I haven't heard this personally, but I'm sure a lot of these recruits are going around saying now, if you come to school, you could make this money, right? Versus going over here. You could get a $20,000 sneaker deal or a $50,000.
I will say this too, man. Not to say players weren't getting money prior.
Well,
it
wasn't, yeah.
But the fact that it's done
openly,
yeah, I believe it destroys their drive and it stunts their growth.
Okay.
Because it's just too much too early.
That's true too.
The hype, the social media, everybody praising you, this and that, and you're not working on your craft.
No.
And I think you're gonna have more and more young players tap out early.
It could be. Well, that like I said before, the obscurity that was available before 6th, 7th, 8th grade. I didn't know who was the top 8th grade player when I was even in high school. You really didn't hear of somebody who was ranked number 1 as a freshman, whatever the case may be. Now it's crazy. In grade school, this stuff starts. So yeah, long term, I don't think it's healthy for their development at all. But again, I don't know how it's going to stop because so much money is attached to this now. So it's kind of hard to say what's going to happen.